The dust swirled around Madeline Cooper's skirts as she marched away from Silver Creek's train depot. Her worn leather valise clutched tightly in one hand. Determination etched on her face despite the tears threatening to spill. The year was 1878, and at 22, she had just watched her last hope pull away with the eastbound train, black smoke billowing into the clear Arizona sky. She had exactly $3 to her name and nowhere to go when a deep voice cut through her thoughts. "Your journey ends with me, miss." Madeline froze, her heart hammering against her ribs as she slowly turned to face the man who had spoken. He sat astride a chestnut stallion, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a revolver holstered at his hip, he looked every inch the dangerous cowboy she'd been warned about before leaving Boston. "I beg your pardon," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt, one hand slipping into her pocket where she kept a small derringer her father had given her. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, and as he stepped closer, sunlight revealed a face weathered by years under the harsh western sun. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, crinkled slightly at the corners as he removed his hat. "Isaac Blackwood, madam, Sheriff of Silver Creek." He gestured to the badge pinned to his vest. "And unless I'm mistaken, you're Madeline Cooper." Madeline's fingers loosened around the hidden gun. "How do you know my name?" "Your father's telegram arrived yesterday. Said you might be coming, asked me to look out for you." His expression softened. "Though from the way you're heading out of town instead of waiting for him, I'm guessing there's been some misunderstanding." The tears Madeline had been fighting finally spilled over. "There's been no misunderstanding, Sheriff. My father isn't coming. That much was made clear in the letter I received at the last stop." She thrust a crumpled paper toward him. "He's remarried. His new wife doesn't want his troublesome daughter around, and he's chosen her happiness over mine." Isaac Blackwood read the letter, his jaw tightening. "I'm sorry, Miss Cooper, that's a hard thing to bear." He handed the paper back. "But where do you plan to go now?" "Next town's 30 miles, and there's nothing but open country between here and there." "I'll manage," she said, though even to her own ears, her voice lacked conviction. "With all due respect, madam, you won't." He gestured to her city boots and impractical dress. "Not dressed like that, with night coming and coyotes about. Silver Creek's not much, but we've got a decent boarding house where you can stay until you sort things out." Madeline squared her shoulders. "I have $3 to my name, Sheriff. That won't get me far in a boarding house." A hint of a smile touched Isaac's lips. "Mrs. Holloway owes me a favor, and as it happens, she's looking for help with the cooking and cleaning." He reached for her valise. "Let me carry that for you." "I don't accept charity," Madeline said stiffly. "It's not charity if you work for your keep." He didn't reach for her bag again, respecting her independence. "Besides, I promised your father I'd look after you if you arrived. I'm a man of my word, even if others aren't." Something in his steady gaze made Madeline hesitate. In Boston, she'd been warned about the dangers of the West: wild men, lawlessness, and hardship. Yet here was this sheriff, offering help with no apparent ulterior motive. "One night," she conceded finally. "Then I'll decide what to do." Isaac nodded, seemingly satisfied with this compromise. "One night it is, Miss Cooper." He gestured toward his horse. "Samson here can carry both of us back to town if you don't mind riding double." Madeline eyed the massive stallion warily. "I've never ridden a horse before." A look of genuine surprise crossed Isaac's face. "Never?" "Well, there's a first time for everything in the West." He mounted smoothly, then extended his hand down to her. "You'll sit behind me, just hold on tight." With reluctance, Madeline placed her hand in his, surprised by the gentleness with which he pulled her up. Soon she was seated behind him, her arms wrapped awkwardly around his waist, her face burning with embarrassment at such close contact with a stranger. "Ready?" he asked over his shoulder. "As I'll ever be," she replied, tightening her grip as the horse began to move. As they rode back toward the small town she'd been so eager to leave, Madeline couldn't help but wonder if fate had just altered her course in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The boarding house, run by Mrs. Holloway, was a two-story wooden structure with a wide porch and lace curtains that seemed oddly refined among the rugged buildings of Silver Creek. Inside, it smelled of baked bread and furniture polish, reminding Madeline painfully of home. Mrs. Holloway herself was a plump, gray-haired woman with keen eyes that assessed Madeline from head to toe. "So this is Edward Cooper's daughter," she said, her tone neutral. "You look like your mother." Madeline stiffened. "You knew my mother, knew of her." "Your father showed me a photograph once, years ago, when he was passing through." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. "She had your same proud chin." Isaac cleared his throat. "Miss Cooper needs lodging, Martha. I told her about the help you've been wanting." Mrs. Holloway nodded briskly. "I can use an extra pair of hands, especially with the cattle drive coming through next week. The room's small, but it's clean and meals are included." She named a modest weekly sum that would quickly deplete Madeline's $3. Before Madeline could respond, Isaac intervened. "Her first week's already settled, part of Edward's arrangement with me." Madeline opened her mouth to protest this obvious lie, but a warning glance from Isaac silenced her. Later, when Mrs. Holloway had shown her to a small but indeed clean room under the eaves, she confronted him in the narrow hallway. "Why did you do that? I told you I don't accept charity." Isaac leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Consider it a loan, then. You can pay me back once you're settled." His eyes held hers steadily. "You're a proud woman, Miss Cooper, and that'll serve you well out here, but pride won't keep you fed or sheltered. Sometimes accepting help is the strongest thing you can do." Madeline looked away first. "I'll repay every cent. I don't doubt it." He straightened, settling his hat back on his head. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow's soon enough to face whatever comes next." As he turned to leave, Madeline found herself calling after him. "Sheriff Blackwood." When he paused, looking back, she said quietly, "Thank you." A smile touched his lips, transforming his weather-beaten face. "You're welcome, Miss Cooper. Welcome to Silver Creek." After he left, Madeline sat on the edge of the narrow bed, fingers tracing the faded quilt beneath her. She'd come west with such hope, believing her father's promises of a new life together after years of separation following her mother's death. Now those dreams lay shattered, leaving her adrift in a strange land. Yet as she unpacked her few belongings, placing her mother's silver-backed hairbrush on the small dresser, Madeline felt an unexpected emotion stirring beneath her disappointment and anger. It was something akin to freedom, the realization that, for the first time in her life, no one was dictating her path. Not her strict Boston aunt who had raised her after her mother died and her father went west. Not her father with his broken promises. Not even society with its rigid expectations for a young woman. Here, in this dusty frontier town, perhaps she could forge her own way. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Morning arrived with the sound of roosters crowing and the clatter of activity from the kitchen below. Madeline dressed quickly in her simplest gown, pinning her dark hair into a practical knot. When she descended the stairs, she found Mrs. Holloway already elbow-deep in bread dough. "There you are," the older woman said. "Breakfast is on the table. Eat quickly, then you can help me with these loaves. We've got 8 boarders to feed, plus folks coming in for lunch." Madeline ate the offered plate of eggs and bacon, then rolled up her sleeves. Though she'd had little experience with cooking, her aunt had employed a cook. she was determined to learn. By midday, her back ached, her hands were raw, and she'd earned a grudging nod of approval from Mrs. Holloway. "You're a quick study," the older woman remarked as Madeline successfully flipped a pancake without breaking it. "Most city girls would be complaining by now." "I'm not most girls," Madeline replied, surprised by the pride she felt in this small accomplishment. "So I see, Mrs. Holloway's sharp eyes softened. "Your father's a fool." The unexpected comment brought a lump to Madeline's throat. "Yes," she agreed quietly, "it seems he is." The door to the dining room swung open and Isaac Blackwood entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His eyes found Madeline immediately, taking in her flour-dusted apron and flushed cheeks. "Sheriff," Mrs. Holloway greeted him. "Coffee's fresh." "Thank you, Martha," he nodded to Madeline. "Miss Cooper, settling in, as you can see." She gestured to her apron. "Mrs. Holloway is teaching me the art of pancakes." A smile tugged at his lips. "An essential skill in these parts." He accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Holloway. "I came to let you know I sent a telegram to your father this morning, informing him of your arrival and changed circumstances." Madeline stiffened. That wasn't necessary. Perhaps not, but it was right. His blue eyes held hers. "A man should know when he's done wrong by his child. And what good will that knowledge do either of us now?" Her voice was bitter. Isaac sipped his coffee before answering. "That's not for me to say. But in my experience, truth has a way of clearing paths that seemed hopelessly tangled." Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat. "Those pancakes won't flip themselves, girl." Grateful for the interruption, Madeline turned back to the stove. She was acutely aware of Isaac's presence behind her. His quiet conversation with Mrs. Holloway about town matters, the occasional deep chuckle that somehow resonated in her own chest. When he finally left, promising to return for dinner, Madeline released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He's a good man," Mrs. Holloway said matter-of-factly. "Best sheriff this town's had in 20 years. "I'm sure he is," Madeline replied non-committally. "Widowed 5 years now. Lost his wife and baby daughter to fever." The older woman's voice softened. "Hasn't looked at another woman since, though plenty have tried to catch his eye." Madeline frowned. "Why are you telling me this?" Mrs. Holloway shrugged. "Just conversation, and a warning, perhaps, a warning. Not to mistake kindness for something more." Mrs. Holloway wiped her hands on her apron. "The sheriff helps everyone in need. It's his nature. Don't go reading anything special into it." "I assure you," Madeline said stiffly, "romantic entanglement is the furthest thing from my mind." Mrs. Holloway's knowing smile suggested she'd heard such declarations before. "Of course, dear. Now, let's get these dishes washed before the lunch crowd arrives." The days that followed fell into a pattern. Madeline rose early, helping Mrs. Holloway prepare breakfast for the boarders, mostly single men working at the nearby silver mine or passing through on business. She learned to cook hearty Western fare, to clean efficiently, and to deflect the occasional flirtatious comment with a polite but firm response. Isaac came for dinner most evenings, sometimes bringing news of the outside world gathered from travelers or telegrams. He never mentioned whether he'd received a response from her father, and Madeline didn't ask. The pain of her father's rejection was still too raw. On her 4th day in Silver Creek, as she was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house, Madeline noticed a young woman watching her from across the fence. Slender and fair-haired, dressed in a simple but well-made blue dress, she looked to be about Madeline's age. "Hello," the stranger called. "You must be Miss Cooper. I'm Nancy Miller, the schoolteacher." Madeline smiled, grateful for a friendly face close to her own age. "Please call me Madeline." Nancy came around to the boarding house yard. "I've been meaning to introduce myself. but end-of-term examinations have kept me busy." She had a forthright manner that Madeline found refreshing after the careful politeness of Boston society. "Mrs. Holloway says you're from Boston. Is it as grand as they say?" The two women fell into easy conversation as Madeline continued hanging sheets. Nancy had come from St. Louis 2 years earlier, drawn by the advertisement for a teacher and the promise of independence. "It was terrifying at first," Nancy admitted. "I'd never been more than 10 miles from home. But now I can't imagine going back to having my every move scrutinized by family and neighbors." "I understand completely," Madeline said, thinking of her aunt's strict household. "A few of us ladies gather on Saturday evenings for conversation and needlework," Nancy said as she helped Madeline with the last sheet. "Nothing formal, just a chance to enjoy female company. Would you care to join us tomorrow?" Madeline hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that very much." "Wonderful. I'll come by around 7. Nancy glanced at the sun. "I should get back to my students. It was lovely meeting you, Madeline." As Nancy departed, Madeline felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Perhaps she could find a place here after all, forge connections and build a life of her own choosing. That evening, when Isaac arrived for dinner, he seemed distracted, his usual easy manner replaced by a certain tension. After the meal, as Madeline cleared dishes, he approached her. "Might I have a word with you in private, Miss Cooper?" Apprehension tightened her stomach. "Of course." They stepped onto the back porch, where the evening breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Isaac removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture Madeline had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "I received a reply to my telegram today," he said finally. Madeline's hands clutched her skirts. "From my father." Isaac nodded. "He confirms what his letter told you. He's remarried and his new wife." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She has strong opinions about his past." "You mean about me?" Madeline said flatly. "Yes." Isaac's eyes held genuine regret. "He's sending money for your return passage to Boston, should you wish it." Anger flared hot in Madeline's chest. How generous of him to pay for my disposal. "There's more." Isaac hesitated. "He's also enclosed funds for your establishment here, if that's your preference. A substantial amount, in fact. This was unexpected." Madeline frowned. Why would he do that? Guilt, perhaps, or genuine concern beneath his weakness. Isaac handed her an envelope. "The money's yours either way. I've deposited it with the bank for safekeeping." Madeline took the envelope with numb fingers. Inside was a bank draft for an amount that made her gasp, along with a brief note in her father's familiar handwriting. "Madeline, I have failed you as a father in ways I cannot rectify. This money is yours by right, part of your mother's inheritance that I should have forwarded years ago. Use it to build whatever life brings you happiness, whether in Boston or elsewhere. I ask no forgiveness, only that you find peace." Edward Cooper. Tears blurred Madeline's vision, not of sadness, but of a complex emotion somewhere between anger and relief. The money represented freedom, choices she hadn't believed possible days earlier. "Are you all right?" Isaac's voice was gentle. Madeline looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close he stood, how the fading light softened the lines of his face. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I've spent so many years hoping my father would want me, and now you're free to want something else," Isaac finished for her. Their eyes held for a long moment. Then Madeline straightened her shoulders, tucking the bank draft back into its envelope. "Yes, exactly that." As twilight deepened around them, she felt a strange sense of possibility unfurling within her like a map of unexplored territory, with all paths open before her. Saturday evening found Madeline nervously smoothing her best dress, a forest green silk that brought out the hazel in her eyes as she prepared for Nancy's gathering. Mrs. Holloway had given her the evening off, with an approving nod at her efforts to establish connections in town. Nancy arrived promptly at 7, bringing with her a vibrant energy that immediately put Madeline at ease. "You look lovely," the schoolteacher declared. "The ladies will be delighted to meet you. We don't get many newcomers with your refinement." As they walked through the quiet streets, Nancy pointed out local landmarks: the small church where services were held every Sunday, the general store owned by the Wilkinsons for 30 years, and the saloon that Nancy referred to as the establishment we pretend not to notice. The gathering was held at the home of Mrs. Peterson, the doctor's wife, a comfortable house with actual glass windows and a piano in the parlor. 5 other women welcomed Madeline with varying degrees of warmth, their curiosity evident in their questions about Boston and her journey west. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere, Miss Cooper?" asked Mrs. Peterson as she poured tea. Madeline had prepared for this question. "Family circumstances changed unexpectedly. I decided a fresh start was in order." "Brave girl," commented an older woman introduced as Mrs. Bishop, the minister's wife. "Most young ladies wouldn't venture west alone. Necessity sometimes breeds courage," Madeline replied, finding comfort in the rhythmic motion of her needle as she worked on a piece of embroidery she'd brought. "Well, we're glad you've joined us," Nancy said warmly. "Silver Creek needs more young women of character." The conversation flowed easily after that, covering topics from the latest fashions described in month-old magazines to the upcoming Independence Day celebration. Madeline found herself relaxing, enjoying the simple pleasure of female companionship after the isolation of recent days. As the evening progressed, the conversation inevitably turned to local gossip, and Madeline found herself listening with increasing interest as Isaac's name was mentioned. "Sheriff Blackwood broke up another fight at the saloon last night," Mrs. Wilkinson reported. "That new dealer they brought in is causing trouble." "Isaac handles such matters with admirable restraint," Mrs. Peterson remarked. "Unlike our previous sheriff, who was as likely to join the brawl as end it." "Such a shame about his wife," sighed Mrs. Bishop. "Elizabeth was a lovely soul. The fever took her so quickly." "And little Sarah not even a year old," added another woman, shaking her head. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, but that was a hard blow for any man to bear." Madeline kept her eyes on her needlework, absorbing these details about Isaac's past. She'd known he was a widower, but hearing the names of his lost family made their absence more real, explained the shadow she sometimes glimpsed behind his smile. "He's built a fine life of service," Mrs. Peterson said, "though I do wish he'd consider remarrying. A man shouldn't be alone forever." "Perhaps our new arrival might catch his eye," Mrs. Wilkinson suggested with a meaningful glance at Madeline. Heat rushed to Madeline's cheeks. "The sheriff has been kind enough to assist me during my adjustment to Silver Creek. Nothing more." Nancy came to her rescue. "Madeline has only just arrived. I'm sure the last thing on her mind is matrimony, especially after her long journey." The women accepted this redirection, moving on to discuss the shortage of sugar at the general store. But Madeline found her thoughts lingering on Isaac, his quiet strength, the gentle way he had of listening as though every word mattered, the unexpected smile that transformed his serious face. Later, as Nancy walked her back to the boarding house under a sky brilliant with stars, Madeline found herself asking, was it very bad? The fever that took Isaac's Sheriff Blackwood's family, Nancy's expression grew somber. "Terrible. It swept through town 4 summers ago. We lost 12 people, including Elizabeth and little Sarah." Isaac nearly worked himself to death helping Dr. Peterson tend to the sick. Some thought he was trying to follow his family to the grave. She paused. After it was over, something in him changed. He became more dedicated to his duties, but also more removed, as though he'd built walls around his heart. "That's understandable," Madeline said softly, thinking of her own carefully constructed defenses after years of her father's broken promises. "Yes, but it's a lonely way to live." Nancy squeezed her arm. "We all need connection, Madeline, even those of us who have been hurt by it before." At the boarding house steps, Nancy bid her good night with a promise to call again soon. Madeline climbed the stairs to her room, her mind full of the evening's revelations. As she undressed for bed, she found herself drawn to the window, gazing out at the quiet town bathed in moonlight. Somewhere out there, Isaac Blackwood was making his rounds, watching over Silver Creek with the dedication Nancy had described. The thought brought an unexpected warmth to her chest, a feeling she wasn't quite ready to examine closely. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Madeline dressed carefully for church, aware that this would be her first public appearance before most of the town. Her green silk would be too formal, so she chose a simple blue cotton dress, adorned only with a cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother. Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly as Madeline descended the stairs. "You'll do, though you might want this." She handed Madeline a bonnet with a modest blue ribbon. "Sun's fierce out here, even in spring. No sense ruining your complexion." The church was a small white painted building with a single bell in its modest steeple. Inside, wooden pews faced a simple altar, light streaming through plain glass windows. As Madeline entered alongside Mrs. Holloway, she felt the weight of curious gazes. She lifted her chin slightly, meeting the looks with composed dignity. Nancy waved from a pew near the front, and Madeline gratefully joined her. As the congregation settled, Madeline couldn't help noticing Isaac's tall figure standing at the back. His Sunday clothes a marked change from his usual practical attire. He caught her glance and nodded slightly, a gesture that shouldn't have sent such a flutter through her chest. Reverend Bishop's sermon focused on new beginnings, drawing parallels between spring's renewal and the soul's capacity for rebirth. Madeline found herself unexpectedly moved by his words, seeing parallels to her own situation. After the service, the congregation gathered outside, the social hour as much a part of Sunday tradition as the worship itself. Nancy immediately introduced Madeline to several people she hadn't met at the gathering, including Dr. Peterson, a grave man with kind eyes. "Miss Cooper," a familiar voice said behind her. Madeline turned to find Isaac standing there, hat in hand. "I trust you're finding Silver Creek agreeable." "Increasingly so," she replied with a smile. "The people have been most welcoming. I'm glad to hear it." He hesitated, then added, "I wondered if you might like to see more of the area. There's a spot not far from town with a fine view of the valley, perfect for a Sunday afternoon." Madeline blinked in surprise. Was the sheriff inviting her on an outing? The murmur of conversation around them seemed to dim as she considered his offer. It would be entirely improper in Boston to accept such an invitation without a chaperone. But this wasn't Boston, and the usual rules seemed distant here. "That sounds lovely," she heard herself say, "though I'm afraid I still don't ride." A smile touched his lips. "We can take my wagon, more comfortable for conversation anyway." Nancy, who had overheard, gave Madeline an encouraging nod. "The view from Eagle Point is worth seeing, and the wildflowers are spectacular this time of year." "Then I accept," Madeline said, feeling a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. "What time shall we depart?" "I'll come by the boarding house at 2 if that suits you." Isaac's eyes held hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary. 2 o'clock is perfect. As Isaac moved away to speak with Reverend Bishop, Nancy leaned close to Madeline. "Well, well," she murmured. "It seems our sheriff has taken a special interest in your adjustment to Silver Creek." "He's merely being kind," Madeline protested, though her quickened pulse suggested she hoped for something more. "Isaac Blackwood doesn't extend such invitations lightly," Nancy replied. "In fact, I can't recall the last time he specifically sought out a lady's company." Her eyes sparkled with friendly mischief. "You've made quite an impression, Madeline Cooper." Back at the boarding house, Madeline changed into a simpler dress suitable for an outdoor excursion, her mind racing with possibilities. Was this merely a neighborly gesture from the sheriff, or something more? And if it was more, was she ready for such attention? Her father's betrayal was still a raw wound, and her plans for the future remained uncertain. The bank draft sat in her dresser drawer, representing choices she had yet to make. Starting a romantic attachment now seemed unwise. Yet when Isaac arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, driving a clean wagon with a matched pair of grays, Madeline's reservations faded at the sight of his smile. He helped her up to the seat with careful hands, then climbed up beside her. "Ready for your first proper look at Arizona territory, Miss Cooper?" he asked as he flicked the reins. "More than ready," she replied, and was surprised to find she meant it. The wagon rolled out of town, following a well-worn trail that wound through stands of juniper and sage. The afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, bringing out rich hues in the red rocks and distant mountains. As they traveled, Isaac pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local history. "That ridge there is where the Apache would watch for travelers," he explained. "Not so many years ago, this would have been dangerous country for folks like us." "And now," Madeline asked, "there's peace of a sort. The Army's got most tribes on reservations now." A shadow crossed his face. "Not the kind of peace that sits well with everyone, but better than the bloodshed before." Madeline studied his profile. "You sound as though you have mixed feelings about it." Isaac glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Most folks don't notice that." He was quiet for a moment. "I've known good men on both sides of that conflict, seen terrible things done in the name of progress and protection. The older I get, the less simple things seem." "I understand," Madeline said softly. "My father used to say that wisdom begins when we recognize that most questions have more than one right answer." "Your father sounds like a thoughtful man." "He can be," she admitted, "when it suits him." The bitterness in her voice was impossible to hide. Isaac didn't press, and Madeline was grateful for his sensitivity. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of hooves and creak of wagon wheels creating a soothing backdrop. Eventually, the trail began to climb, and Isaac guided the horses around a bend to reveal a stunning vista. Below them stretched the valley, Silver Creek visible as a ribbon of green winding through the rugged terrain. In the distance, mountains rose blue and majestic against the sky. "Eagle Point," Isaac announced, pulling the wagon to a stop in a small clearing. "Best view in the county." Madeline drew in a breath. "It's magnificent." Isaac helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. He spread a blanket on a flat rock overlooking the valley, then retrieved a small basket from the wagon. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you hadn't eaten much lunch," he explained at Madeline's questioning look. "Thought you might be hungry." The simple picnic, he unpacked cold chicken, biscuits, and apple preserves touched Madeline more deeply than any elaborate meal in Boston ever had. They ate as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley, talking easily about books they'd read, places they'd seen, and dreams they'd harbored. "I always wanted to see the ocean," Isaac confessed. "Made it as far as New Orleans once, but got caught up in other matters and never quite reached the Gulf." "It's both more and less impressive than you might imagine," Madeline told him, describing the Atlantic coast near Boston, where she'd often walked as a girl. "Terrifying in its power, but also somehow comforting in its constancy." "Like this land," Isaac said, gesturing to the vast expanse before them. "It can kill you with drought or flash flood, but there's a strange comfort in its harshness. You always know where you stand." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, Madeline found herself studying Isaac's face, the lines etched by sun and experience, the quiet strength in his jaw, the unexpected gentleness in his eyes when they rested on her. "Why did you really invite me here today?" she asked suddenly. Isaac looked at her directly. "Because in the week since you arrived, you've shown more courage and determination than most people I know, because you face each day with dignity despite your disappointment. Because when you smile, really smile, not the polite one you use with strangers, it lights up something in me I thought was long dead." He paused. "And because I wanted to know if there could be something between us worth exploring." His honesty took her breath away. In Boston, men spoke in careful circumlocutions, hiding true intentions behind social niceties. Isaac's directness was as refreshing as it was unsettling. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't need to say anything now." He gathered the remains of their picnic. "I know your life is unsettled. I know you're still deciding what comes next. I just wanted you to know where I stand so you can include that in your considerations." As they packed up and headed back toward town, the setting sun casting long shadows before them, Madeline felt a strange peace settling over her. Isaac wasn't asking for promises or commitments. He was simply making space for possibility, a gift more precious than he could know. In the days that followed, Silver Creek began to feel less like a temporary refuge and more like a place Madeline might belong. Her work at the boarding house grew easier as she mastered Mrs. Holloway's recipes and routines. Regular attendance at Nancy's Saturday gatherings introduced her to more of the town's residents, and she found herself welcomed into the small community with increasing warmth. Isaac remained a steady presence, stopping by the boarding house most evenings, occasionally inviting her for walks through town or rides in the surrounding countryside. They spoke of books, of politics, of the changing West. He told her stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west as a young man seeking adventure, his years as a deputy before becoming sheriff. In turn, she shared memories of her mother, her education at a Boston ladies' seminary, her passion for literature and art. What they didn't discuss directly was the growing attachment between them, the way her heart quickened when he entered a room, the lingering touches when their hands met, the long glances that communicated more than words could express. It was as though they had reached an unspoken agreement to let their feelings develop naturally, without the pressure of formal courtship. June brought scorching heat that transformed Silver Creek. The townsfolk moved at a slower pace during daylight hours, conducting business in the relative cool of early morning or evening. Madeline adapted by rising before dawn to help Mrs. Holloway with baking, then resting during the hottest part of the afternoon. It was during one such quiet afternoon, as Madeline sat reading in the boarding house parlor, that Mrs. Holloway brought her a telegram. "Just arrived," the older woman said, a curious expression on her face. Madeline's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Only her father knew where to reach her, and she'd had no communication from him since the bank draft. The message, however, was from an unexpected source. Miss Cooper, stop your Aunt Margaret gravely ill stop asks for you stop passage arranged Boston Packet Agency Silver Creek stop regret bearing sad news stop James Collins family solicitor shock washed over Madeline. Aunt Margaret, her mother's sister who had raised her after her mother's death, had never been demonstrative in her affection. But she had provided stability and education when Madeline's father abandoned his responsibilities, and in her own rigid way had cared for her niece's welfare. Bad news. Mrs. Holloway asked gently. My aunt is ill, dying, perhaps. Madeline looked up, feeling suddenly adrift. I should go to her, Mrs. Holloway nodded. Family is family, even when they're difficult. She hesitated. Will you return to Silver Creek afterward? The question crystallized the choice Madeline had been avoiding for weeks. The bank draft from her father provided means for a fresh start anywhere she chose. She could return to Boston permanently, resuming the life and social position she'd been raised for. Or she could come back to this dusty frontier town that had begun to feel like home, to the people who had welcomed her, to the man whose quiet strength had become central to her days. I don't know, she admitted. I need to speak with Sheriff Blackwood. Mrs. Holloway's knowing expression suggested she understood exactly why Isaac's opinion mattered in this decision. He's due for dinner as usual, though if you'd prefer, I can send word you need to see him sooner. No, dinner is soon enough. Madeline folded the telegram carefully. I'll need to check when the next eastbound train departs. Day after tomorrow, early morning, Mrs. Holloway replied promptly. The schedule's been the same for years. Madeline nodded, already mentally cataloging what she would need to pack, arrangements to be made. Yet beneath these practical considerations ran a current of uncertainty about what this journey would mean for her future, and for the tender connection she and Isaac had been nurturing. That evening, when Isaac arrived for dinner, Madeline could tell immediately that he sensed her distress. His eyes sought hers across the dining room, a question in their blue depths. She gave a small shake of her head, indicating they would speak later. The meal seemed interminable, with conversation flowing around Madeline while she picked at her food, her appetite gone. Finally, as the other boarders dispersed, Isaac approached her. "Walk with me," he asked quietly. Outside, the evening air had cooled to a bearable warmth, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. They strolled in silence until they reached the small town square with its modest gazebo. Isaac guided her to a bench beneath an old cottonwood tree, respectfully giving her space to speak when ready. Wordlessly, Madeline handed him the telegram. He read it quickly, his expression grave. "I'm sorry about your aunt," he said, returning the paper. "Will you go?" "I must." Madeline twisted her hands in her lap. "She raised me after my mother died. We were never close in the way some families are, but she did her duty by me when my father wouldn't." Isaac nodded. "When would you leave?" "The day after tomorrow. Early train." She looked up at him, searching his face in the gathering dusk. "Isaac, I don't know if I'll be coming back." He was still for a long moment, only the slight tightening of his jaw betraying his emotion. "I understand," he said finally. "You have options now with your father's money. A life in Boston might offer more than Silver Creek ever could." "That's not," Madeline began, then stopped. In truth, she didn't know what she wanted. The past weeks had shown her possibilities she'd never considered, awakened feelings she'd never experienced. But Boston was familiar, with cultural refinements and social opportunities absent in the frontier town. "It's all right," Isaac said gently. "You don't need to decide now. Go to your aunt, do what you must. Then make your choice based on what will bring you happiness." He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "Just know that if you choose to return, there's a place for you here, with me if that's what you want." Tears pricked at Madeline's eyes. How can you be so understanding? I've known you barely a month, yet you've shown me more consideration than people I've known all my life. A sad smile touched Isaac's lips. When you lose what matters most, you learn to value what remains. Every moment, every connection becomes precious. His fingers tightened around hers. I won't pretend I don't have hopes, Madeline, but I want you to choose freely without pressure or obligation. Impulsively, Madeline leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a brief kiss, chaste by any standard, but the contact sent warmth cascading through her body. When she pulled back, Isaac's eyes were wide with surprise, then darkened with an emotion that made her breath catch. "I'll remember that," he said softly, "while you're gone." The next day passed in a flurry of preparations. Madeline visited the bank to arrange for funds, purchased a ticket at the stage office, and packed her valise. Nancy came to say goodbye, bringing a small book of poetry as a parting gift. Even Mrs. Holloway showed her gruff affection by packing a basket of food for the journey. But it was Isaac who occupied Madeline's thoughts as she prepared to leave. He had promised to see her off at the depot, and the anticipation of that final goodbye filled her with conflicting emotions. On her last evening in Silver Creek, as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, Madeline walked to the small cemetery at the edge of town. She had asked directions earlier, waving off offers of accompaniment. This was something she needed to do alone. The graveyard was peaceful, with simple wooden crosses and stone markers standing in neat rows. It didn't take long to find what she sought: two graves side by side, one larger, one heartbreakingly small. Elizabeth Blackwood, beloved wife and mother. Sarah Blackwood, cherished daughter. Both dates ending the same day, 4 years earlier. Madeline stood quietly before them, her heart aching for Isaac's loss. "I don't know if he'll ever truly heal," she said softly to the silent stones. "But he's a good man, the best I've ever known. I think you would be proud of how he's lived, how he's served others." She hesitated, feeling slightly foolish talking to graves, yet compelled to continue. "I don't know what will happen between us, but I wanted you to know that I see his worth, his goodness. Whatever comes next, I'll carry that knowledge with me always." As she turned to leave, Madeline nearly collided with a figure standing a few paces behind her. Isaac, his hat in his hands, his expression a complex mixture of surprise and deep emotion. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to intrude, I just wanted to." "It's all right," he interrupted gently. "I come here often. It helps somehow to talk to them." He glanced at the graves, then back to her. "Thank you for what you said." Heat rushed to Madeline's cheeks. "You heard." "Some." His eyes held hers steadily. "Enough." They walked back to town together in the gathering dusk, not touching, yet connected by something deeper than physical contact. When they reached the boarding house, Isaac paused. "I'll be at the depot tomorrow, first light." Madeline nodded, unable to trust her voice. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell, then turned and walked away, his tall figure gradually fading into the shadows. Morning arrived too quickly. Madeline dressed carefully in her traveling suit, a practical navy blue that would show minimal dust from the journey. Mrs. Holloway provided a hearty breakfast she couldn't eat, then insisted on walking with her to the depot, though Isaac had arranged for her trunk to be transported separately. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as they reached the small station. The train sat huffing on the tracks, taking on mail and a few other passengers. And there, standing tall amid the early morning bustle, was Isaac. Mrs. Holloway muttered something about checking on the baggage and discreetly moved away, leaving Madeline and Isaac alone. "Your trunk's loaded," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I spoke to the conductor. He'll make sure you change trains properly in Albuquerque." "Thank you." Madeline twisted her gloved hands together. Now that the moment of departure had arrived, she found herself struggling for words. Isaac reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something for the journey," he explained, placing it in her hands. Madeline unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "Isaac, it's beautiful. I thought you might want to record your thoughts, your experiences." His eyes held hers. "Maybe it will help you decide what comes next." Tears threatened and Madeline blinked rapidly to contain them. "I'll write in it every day." The train whistle blew, a warning that departure was imminent. Isaac took a deep breath. "Madeline, I don't," she interrupted, placing her fingers gently against his lips. "Don't say goodbye. It feels too final." A sad smile touched his eyes. "Then I'll say this instead. I'll be here, whatever you decide." The conductor called for boarding. Isaac took her arm, escorting her to the steps of the passenger car. As she climbed aboard, he held her hand until the last possible moment, their fingers sliding apart as distance grew between them. Madeline found her seat by the window, looking out to see Isaac standing perfectly still on the platform, his eyes never leaving hers as the train began to move. She pressed her palm against the glass, a silent promise, and watched his figure grow smaller until Silver Creek disappeared from view. The journey east was long and grueling, despite the relative comfort of first-class accommodations. Madeline spent hours staring at the changing landscape, watching the rugged beauty of the West give way to the rolling plains of the Midwest, and finally to the more settled countryside of the East. Each night in her berth, she wrote in the journal Isaac had given her, recording not just the events of her journey but the tumult of her emotions. Boston, when she finally arrived, seemed both familiar and strangely foreign. The city's narrow streets and brick buildings, the carefully manicured parks and ceaseless bustle felt confined after the open spaces of Arizona. Even the air tasted different, heavy with moisture and the sense of commerce and humanity. A carriage took her to her aunt's home in Beacon Hill, a stately townhouse where Madeline had spent her formative years. The housekeeper who answered the door gasped at the sight of her, then quickly composed herself into proper Boston reserve. "Miss Cooper, we've been expecting you. Your aunt is upstairs." Aunt Margaret's illness had transformed her. Once a formidable woman who ruled her household with rigid propriety, she now lay frail and diminished against white pillows, her skin nearly translucent, her once sharp eyes clouded with pain. "Madeline," she whispered as her niece approached the bed. "You came." "Of course I came." Madeline took her aunt's papery hand. "How are you feeling?" "Dying," Margaret replied with characteristic bluntness, but more slowly than the doctors predicted, much to their chagrin. A ghost of her former acerbic humor flickered in her expression. "You look different. The West has changed you." "Perhaps it has," Madeline admitted. "Tell me about it. The truth, not some sanitized version you think suitable for my delicate sensibilities." Margaret gestured weakly to a chair. "I've little time left for pleasantries." So Madeline sat and told her aunt about Silver Creek, the vast landscapes, the hard-working people, the sense of possibility that permeated the frontier. She spoke of Mrs. Holloway's gruff kindness, Nancy's friendship, the community that had welcomed her despite her Eastern ways. And she spoke of Isaac, his integrity, his quiet strength, the depth of feeling beneath his reserved exterior. As she described him, Madeline realized how central he had become to her thoughts, how deeply she had come to care for him in their brief acquaintance. Margaret listened in silence, her shrewd eyes studying her niece's animated face. When Madeline finally fell quiet, the older woman asked, "Do you love this sheriff of yours?" The directness of the question caught Madeline off guard. It's too soon to say for certain. Nonsense. At my age, one recognizes love when one sees it. Margaret's lips curved in a rare smile. Your mother had the same look when she spoke of your father, before he broke her heart with his wandering ways. Madeline stiffened. Isaac is nothing like my father. No, I gathered that from your description. Margaret shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. Which is why I'm surprised you left him to come here. You asked for me, Madeline said, confused. And you came, which speaks well of your character despite my many failings as a guardian. Margaret's gaze was direct, but I did not ask you to abandon your happiness. I haven't decided yet where my happiness lies, Madeline protested. Haven't you? Her aunt's expression softened. My dear girl, I've known you since infancy. You never spoke of Boston with half the passion you just displayed describing that dusty frontier town and its sheriff. Madeline fell silent, the truth of her aunt's words resonating within her. I called you here for 2 reasons, Margaret continued. First, to make peace between us before I die. I was not the warm maternal figure you deserved after your mother's death. My sister had a gift for affection that I always lacked. She paused, her breath labored. But I did care for you in my own inadequate way. Tears pricked at Madeline's eyes. I know you did, Aunt Margaret. You gave me education, security, guidance. The second reason, Margaret pressed on, was to tell you that you're my heir. This house, my investments, all will be yours. It's a considerable fortune. She held up a frail hand when Madeline began to protest. Not because of any obligation, but because you are family, and because I believe you will use it wisely. Madeline sat stunned. Between her father's bank draft and this unexpected inheritance, she would be a woman of substantial means, free to choose her path without financial constraints. Now, Margaret said, her voice weakening, tell me truly. When I'm gone, will you stay in Boston or return to your sheriff and his Silver Creek? The question hung in the air between them, demanding an honesty Madeline had been avoiding even in her private thoughts. In that moment of truth, the answer came with surprising clarity. I'll return to Silver Creek, she said softly. To Isaac, if he'll still have me. Margaret nodded, satisfaction in her tired eyes. Good, I'd hate to think I raised a fool. She closed her eyes briefly. Now go right to your sheriff before I expire from all this emotional discourse. That night, Madeline penned a letter to Isaac, pouring out her feelings with a candor that would have been unthinkable in her former Boston life. She described her aunt's condition, the unexpected inheritance, and most importantly, her decision to return to Silver Creek to him if he would welcome her back. As weeks stretched into a month, Madeline divided her time between her aunt's sickroom and the necessary legal consultations regarding her inheritance. Margaret rallied briefly, then declined steadily, facing death with the same unsentimental practicality that had characterized her life. No reply came from Isaac, though Madeline checked each day's mail with increasing anxiety. Had she misread his feelings? Had he moved on in her absence? The uncertainty gnawed at her, even as she tried to focus on her aunt's needs. Margaret passed away quietly on a rainy July morning, slipping from sleep into death with such peaceful transition that Madeline, dozing in a chair beside the bed, didn't immediately realize she was gone. The funeral was small but dignified, attended by Boston's older families who had known Margaret for decades. As executrix of her aunt's will, Madeline found herself immersed in legal and financial matters that demanded her attention. The townhouse had to be sorted, decisions made about furnishings and personal effects. Through it all, she continued to write in the journal Isaac had given her, finding solace in addressing her thoughts to him even without response. 2 weeks after the funeral, As Madeline sat in the study reviewing documents with her aunt's solicitor, the housekeeper interrupted with an unexpected announcement. "There's a gentleman caller for you, Miss Cooper. A Mr. Blackwood. He says he's come from Arizona Territory." Madeline's heart seemed to stop, then race forward at a gallop. "Isaac is here, in Boston." "Yes, miss. Shall I show him in?" Yes, please do." Madeline turned to the solicitor. "Mr. Collins, might we continue this tomorrow?" The elderly lawyer smiled indulgently. "Of course, Miss Cooper. These matters can wait." He gathered his papers with deliberate slowness, clearly curious about the visitor who had caused such a reaction. Madeline barely noticed his departure, her attention fixed on the doorway where at any moment Isaac would appear. She smoothed her black mourning dress, suddenly conscious of her appearance after weeks of grief and responsibility. And then he was there, filling the doorframe with his presence. He looked strange in Eastern clothes, a well-cut suit replacing his usual practical attire, his hat in his hands. But his eyes, those remarkable blue eyes, were unchanged as they found hers across the room. "Isaac," she breathed, rising to her feet. "Madeline." He stepped forward, hesitating as though uncertain of his welcome. "I got your letter. You didn't write back." It wasn't an accusation, merely a statement of the fact that had tormented her. "I'm not much for letters." A hint of his familiar smile touched his lips. "Thought it better to come in person, especially when you mentioned your aunt's condition." They stood facing each other, separated by the width of a Persian carpet that suddenly seemed an impossible distance. "I'm sorry about your aunt," Isaac said gently. "Thank you." Madeline twisted her hands together. "She died peacefully, and we had time to make peace between us." Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then, as though he could no longer maintain the formal distance, he crossed to her in 3 long strides. His hands came up to frame her face with exquisite tenderness. "I missed you," he said simply. "Every day. I missed you too." Madeline's voice caught on the words. "So much." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that matched her own. Madeline clung to him, the solid reality of his presence washing away weeks of uncertainty and loneliness. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Madeline Cooper. I think I have since that first day at the depot, when you stood so proud and determined despite everything." Joy bloomed in Madeline's chest, a feeling so intense it was almost painful. "I love you too, Isaac Blackwood. I want to come home to Silver Creek to you." Isaac drew back slightly, his expression serious. "Are you certain? Boston is your world. Silver Creek is just a dusty frontier town without the refinements you're used to." "Boston was my prison," Madeline corrected him. "A gilded one, perhaps, but still a place where I was defined by others' expectations." She touched his face, tracing the lines etched by sun and experience. "With you in Silver Creek, I found myself, found what matters." The joy that transformed Isaac's face was answer enough, but he spoke the words she longed to hear. "Then come home with me, Madeline. Be my wife. Build a life with me in that dusty town." "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in Boston, a small ceremony attended by a few of her aunt's friends and Isaac's brother, who had traveled from Pennsylvania for the occasion. The solicitor, Mr. Collins, gave her away, beaming with grandfatherly pride despite his initial concerns about her choice to leave Boston society for the untamed West. Madeline wore her mother's pearls with a simple cream gown, refusing the traditional black that a recently bereaved woman might be expected to don. "Aunt Margaret specifically told me not to mourn her with excessive sentiment," she explained to those who raised eyebrows. "She would approve of this choice." After the ceremony, as they prepared for the journey west, Madeline arranged for most of her inheritance to be converted to more portable assets. Some she invested in Boston businesses that would provide income regardless of where she lived. Some she transferred to banks in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. And a significant portion she designated for specific purposes in Silver Creek purposes she had discussed at length with Isaac. The journey west felt entirely different from her eastbound trip. Where before she had been alone and uncertain, now she traveled with the man she loved, anticipation building with each mile that brought them closer to their future home. "I've been thinking," Isaac said one evening as they sat in the dining car, watching the Nebraska landscape roll by, "about the house." "Oh," Madeline sipped her tea, enjoying the comfortable intimacy they had developed. "It's a decent place, but small. Built it myself after." He hesitated, then continued. "After Elizabeth and Sarah died, never thought I'd need more space." Madeline reached across the table to take his hand. "And now," a smile touched his lips, "now I'm thinking we might want to expand, add a proper parlor, maybe another bedroom or two, for guests." Madeline asked innocently, though her heart quickened at his implication. Isaac's eyes held hers steadily. "For family, if you want that." "I do," she said softly. "Very much." His fingers tightened around hers. "We could start work on it right away. I know some good carpenters." "Actually," Madeline said, "I have a slightly different idea. What would you think about building a new house altogether? Something designed for our future from the beginning?" Isaac looked surprised. "That's a bigger undertaking. Are you sure?" "I am." Madeline had given this considerable thought during her time in Boston. Not an ostentatious mansion, but something solid and welcoming, perhaps on that rise just north of town with a view of the valley. Holloway's old claim. That land's been vacant since he died, but it's prime property. Isaac studied her thoughtfully. "You've been planning this?" Madeline smiled. "I may have made some inquiries before leaving Silver Creek. The land is available and with my inheritance." She shrugged slightly. "We can afford to build something that will last generations." Isaac was quiet for a moment, and Madeline worried she had overstepped. Then he lifted her hand to his lips. "You never cease to amaze me, Madeline Blackwood." The sound of her new name sent warmth cascading through her. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," he confirmed. "A house built for our future sounds perfect." When they finally arrived in Silver Creek, stepping down from the train onto the familiar platform, Madeline felt an overwhelming sense of homecoming. The same depot she had tried to flee months earlier now welcomed her back as a bride. The dust and heat somehow comforting in their familiarity. Word of their arrival and marriage had preceded them. Mrs. Holloway waited at the station, her usual gruff manner softened by genuine pleasure. Nancy rushed forward to embrace Madeline, exclaiming over her travels and demanding to hear every detail of the Boston wedding. Even Reverend Bishop was there, offering a blessing on their union. As Isaac helped her into the wagon that would take them to their home, Madeline looked back at the depot where their story had begun. "Your journey ends with me," he had said that day, not knowing how prophetic those words would be. "What are you smiling about?" Isaac asked as he settled beside her. Madeline leaned against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "Just thinking that some endings are really the most beautiful beginnings." His arm came around her shoulders, drawing her close as the wagon began to move toward their future. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood." And as they rode through the town that had become her true home, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that her journey, the one that truly mattered, had indeed ended with him. And in that ending, she had found everything she had ever wanted. 5 years later, Madeline stood on the wide porch of their home on the hill overlooking Silver Creek, watching Isaac teach their 3-year-old son to ride his first pony. Thomas Edward Blackwood, named for both their fathers, sat proudly on the gentle bay, his small hands clutching the saddle horn while Isaac led the animal in careful circles. "Not too fast, Isaac," Madeline called, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly where their second child grew. Isaac grinned up at her. "He's a natural, just like his mother." Madeline laughed. "I hardly think my first riding experience qualifies me as natural." She remembered with vivid clarity how terrified she'd been that first day, clinging to Isaac as they rode double back to town. Now she rode confidently beside her husband whenever they visited outlying ranches or took family picnics in the surrounding countryside. Silver Creek itself had grown in the past 5 years, thanks in part to investments Madeline had made in local businesses. The general store had expanded, a small hotel had replaced the old boarding house, though Mrs. Holloway still ran it with an iron hand, and the school where Nancy taught now boasted 2 classrooms instead of 1. Their home, completed 3 years earlier, had become a center of community life. Built of local stone and timber, with large windows capturing views of the valley, it balanced frontier practicality with touches of Eastern refinement. The library housed Madeline's books alongside Isaac's more modest collection. The kitchen was designed for both functionality and the cooking lessons Madeline offered to young brides. And the nursery, initially built for 1 child, would soon welcome a second occupant. Life wasn't without challenges. The West remained a hard land, with drought years that strained local ranchers and occasional tensions between settlers and the remaining indigenous populations. Isaac's work as sheriff sometimes placed him in danger, leaving Madeline to worry until his safe return. But these difficulties were balanced by profound joys: the birth of their son, the community they had helped nurture, the deep partnership that had grown between them. Each night, as they lay together in the darkness, Madeline marveled at how completely her life had transformed since that fateful day at the depot. "Mama, look." Thomas's excited voice pulled her from her reverie. "I'm riding." Isaac had stepped back slightly, allowing the pony to walk freely while keeping a careful hand near the reins. Thomas bounced slightly in the saddle, his face alight with accomplishment. "Wonderful, darling." Madeline called, her heart swelling with love for this small being who combined Isaac's steady temperament with her own determination. As the lesson continued, Madeline's thoughts drifted to the letter she'd received that morning from her father. Edward Cooper had finally remarried after his second wife's death, this time to a widow he described as sensible and kind. He wrote regularly now, though he had never visited Silver Creek, held back by some combination of shame and stubbornness that Madeline had come to accept if not fully forgive. In his latest letter, he had expressed hope of meeting his grandson and soon-to-be-born grandchild when circumstances permit. Madeline had shown the letter to Isaac, who had simply said, "That's for you to decide, my love. But family connections have a way of healing if given the chance." She was still considering her response. The hurt of her father's earlier rejection had faded with time and happiness, replaced by a cautious willingness to allow him some role in her children's lives. Perhaps next spring, when the baby was older and travel easier. "Penny for your thoughts," Isaac said, startling her from her contemplation. He had lifted Thomas from the pony and now stood before her, their son balanced on his hip. "I rode all by myself, Mama," Thomas announced proudly. "You certainly did, my brave boy." Madeline smoothed his dark hair, so like his father's. "You'll be galloping across the valley before we know it." "Not too soon, I hope," Isaac said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes that still made Madeline's heart quicken after 5 years of marriage. "I was thinking about Papa's letter," she admitted. About whether to invite him here after the baby comes. Isaac nodded, understanding in his gaze. Whatever you decide, I'll support. I know. She reached up to touch his face, marveling at the steadfast love she found there. That's one of the many reasons I love you. Thomas squirmed to be put down, and Isaac complied, watching as the boy ran to the corral fence to gaze admiringly at the pony being led away by one of their ranch hands. I never thought I'd have this again, Isaac said quietly, his arm slipping around Madeline's waist. A family. A future worth fighting for. Nor I, Madeline agreed, leaning into his embrace. That day at the depot, when you stopped me from leaving town, you changed everything. Isaac smiled down at her, his expression tender. Best thing I ever did, stopping a stubborn Boston girl from walking away. Your journey ends with me, Madeline quoted, echoing his words from that fateful day. And begins with you, Isaac added, his hand gently caressing her rounded belly where their daughter grew. Every single day. As the setting sun bathed their home in golden light, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that no inheritance, no Boston mansion, no societal position could have given her the profound happiness she had found here in Silver Creek with this man, this family, this life they had built together. Her journey had indeed ended with him, but the story they were writing together had only just begun.